Hey guys, what's going on? Counterspell here back with another EDH guide. This time we are going over Runo Stormkirk. Uh, this is a double-sided commander. So for one generic, a blue and a black, it's a legendary creature, vampire cleric, flying 1/4. And when Runo Stormkirk enters the battlefield, put up to one target creature card from your graveyard on top of your library, and at the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. You may reveal that card. If a creature card with mana value 6 or greater, or CMC or convert mana cost 6 or greater, is revealed this way, transform Runo Stormkirk into Krothos, Lord of the Deep. It is a legendary Kraken Horde 3/5 flyer. Yeah, 3/5 flying Kraken. Like, you never see that? Well, now you did. And whenever they attacks, I have no idea. Create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of another target attacking creature. If that creature is a Kraken, Leviathan, Octopus, or Serpent, create 2 of those tokens instead. So obviously, Kraken, Leviathan, Octopus, or Serpent, and/or Serpent Tribal is what this deck is going for. But there aren't many Krakens, Leviathans, Octopus creatures, or Serpents really running around in Magic that are very useful, or that would be put in this deck. So we have some cards to help that. So we are going to start off with cards to copy with Krothos, because this deck is really focused on Krothos, Lord of the Deep. And then we have some cards that synergize with what our commander is doing. So we're going to start off with Untitled Kraken. It is a Kraken 6/6 for 5 generic and triple blue, and it is unblockable, meaning your opponents cannot block it. Deep Sea Kraken, 7 generic and triple blue for a 6/6 Kraken that can't be blocked. Once again, suspend of 9 and a mana and 2 generic and a blue. So rather than cast this card from your hand, you may pay 2 generic and blue and exile it with 9 time counters on it. And at the beginning of your upkeep, remove a time counter. When the last is removed, cast it without paying its mana cost. It has haste, meaning it can also attack immediately. And whenever an opponent casts a spell, if DC Kraken is suspended, remove a time counter from it. So this can really be a big payoff. Delirium Kraken, 4 generic and double blue for a 4/6 Kraken that says whenever you draw a card, you may pay 1 generic. When you do, you may tap or untap target creature. So copying multiple of these can help you tap down your opponent's board and just get you in for lethal amount of damage, or untap your creature so that you can block if need be, but that's mostly at the beginning. Anyway, Spawning Kraken, 5 generic and a blue for a 6/6 Kraken that says whenever a Kraken, Leviathan, Octopus, or Serpent you control deals combat damage to a player, create a 9/9 blue Kraken creature token. So copying this will soon give you a big army of 9/9 blue Kraken creature tokens. So say you have one of these and then you attack with Stormkirk and Krothos, and then you attack with Spawning Kraken here, then you can create 2 tokens that are copies of Spawning Kraken, and if they all get through, then that is 3. So that's 9 9/9s right there. So that is 81 power and toughness you have just put onto your board. And in addition to that, you have dealt your opponents 18 or more damage in that turn, which is insane. Next is Nemesis of Reason for 3 generic, a blue and a black. It's a Leviathan Horror 3/7 And when it attacks, defending player puts the top 10 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyards, making copies of this can help mill your opponent out really fast, and just end the game. Serpent of Yawning Depths, 4 generic and double blue for a enchantment creature serpent 6/6 that says Krakens, Leviathans, it should really say octopi or octopus creatures or octopuses. And serpents you control can't be blocked except by Krakens, Leviathans, octopi, and serpents. So creating tokens that are copies of this right here guarantee that your stuff can never be blocked, essentially. This is pretty nice. Serpent of the Endless Sea. It is a serpent for 4 generic and blue, and its power and toughness are each equal to the number of islands you control, and it can't attack unless defending player controls an island. Still, though, this is pretty nice because it can make a great blocker if need be, and its power is most likely increasing due to you playing islands. How cool is that? Next, you have Junk Winder, 5 generic and double blue. It's a 5/6 serpent with infinity for tokens, meaning this spell costs 1 generic less to cast for each token you control. And we're going to have a lot of tokens, so this will be pretty cheap. And whenever a token enters the battlefield under your control, tap target non-land permanent and opponent controls, it doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. So as you're creating these tokens, you can tap them down, tap down your opponent's stuff, anything that isn't a land on their side, and make sure it doesn't untap during their next untap step, and just leave them vulnerable. Shrouded Serpent for 4 generic and triple blue. It is a 4/4 serpent that says when it attacks, defending player may pay 4 generic. If he or she doesn't, Shrouded Serpent is unblockable on the turn. Is unblockable this turn. Meaning that for each Shrouded Serpent, if your opponent does not want to take 4 damage, they have to pay a hefty 4 generic, which could be very difficult. Scourge of Fleets, 5 generic and double blue for a Kraken 6/6. And when it enters the battlefield, return each creature your opponent control with toughness extra less to its owner's hand, where X is the number of islands in control. So this could be a repeated board wipe. Also, real quick to give you an idea of how powerful this could be. So say you attack with Shrouded Serpent and you only have 1, and then you also attack with Krothos. Then you create 2 tokens that are copies of Shrouded Serpent. So the one that can probably be paid for, your opponent pays for it, sure. Or they can't. But next turn, when you untap, you've got 3 Shrouded Serpents for which for each of them, your opponent has to pay 4, and there's 3 of them. So your opponent would have to pay 12 mana just to be able to block 3 4/4s, which is ridiculous. That puts that in. That gives you an idea on how powerful that could be. French Behemoth, 5 generic and double blue for a Kraken 7/7 that you can return a land to control to its owner's hand and untap it, and it gains hexproof until end of turn. And whenever the land enters battlefield under your control, target creature an opponent controls attacks during its controller's next combat phase, if able. So this means you can force your opponents to come at you and also untap Trench Behemoth, and they could fall and just have them fall right into a trap. Kraken of the Straits. It is a Kraken. It's a 6/6 Kraken for 5 generic and double blue. That says creatures with power less than the number of islands you control can't block Kraken of the Straits. Nadir Kraken, 1 generic and double blue for a 2/3 Kraken. That says whenever you draw a card, you may pay 1 generic. If you do, put a +1/+1 account on Nadir Kraken and create a 1/1 blue tentacle creature token. So having multiple of these could be a payoff that creates you an army of tentacle tokens. Idleback Spawn is a 4/8 Kraken with Shroud. And I just realized why I didn't want to put this in here. Because for 5 generic and double blue, Shroud says that it can be the target of spells or abilities, meaning that this cannot be copied. Oops. But it gets +4, +8 as long as a library has 20 or fewer cards in it. It's probably something that can get rid of the whole Shroud thing. But still, probably replace this with like something that can copy. My mistake. Oh, hell of the host. Because you could equip that to Prothos, and then it would create a token that's a copy of Prothos, except that token isn't legendary, so you wouldn't have to sacrifice it. So then you're getting just more and more Prothos tokens and more Prothos triggers. Icebreaker Kraken. For this, I did not forget the Snowlands, finally. Because for 10 generic and double blue, it is an 8/8 snow creature Kraken that costs 1 generic less to cast for each snowland you control. And when it enters the battlefield, artifacts and creatures target opponent controls doesn't attack during that player's next untap step. So your opponent could just be left vulnerable until it comes around to them. Meaning you could have Icebreaker Kraken seal someone's fate, and then the other player to left or right, depending on whoever is there, all they have to do is attack that player for possibly weaken or something. And you can return 3 snowlands you control to their owner's hand, and return Icebreaker Kraken to its owner's hand. So you can do that again. Now, mind you, the tokens this doesn't really work for, because they won't go to your hand. They are tokens, so they just poof out. Because they're not actual cards. Remember, when you're using this thing's ability to return itself to your hand, make sure you're doing the OG, the original. Like the non-token version, I should say. Pearl Lake Ancient, 5 generic, no blue, is a Leviathan, 6/7 with flash, and it can't be countered, which is pretty good. And prowess, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature gets +1/+1 until end turn, and then you can return 3 lands you control to their owner's hand, and return Pearl Lake Ancient to its owner's hand. Like I said, make sure you're using this ability on the non-token version of Pearl Lake Ancient. Now, I know we may not have a bunch of prowess triggers on this due to the fact that we may not have any non-creature cards because we're running creature cards, but still, this is fine. It's a 6/7 with flash, and it's a Leviathan, so it qualifies. Next, we get into our shapeshifters. So, for 3 generic and a blue, we have Clone here. The 0/0 that enters the battlefield is a copy of a creature on the battlefield. Now, the question is raised that if you were to play this down as any Kraken you had, or Leviathan, or Octopus, or Serpent, and attack this and Prothos, this being a copy of one of those listed creatures, and you chose to target this with Prothos, it would create 2 tokens, but would it create 2 of the same tokens? So, like, say Clone was Kraken of the Straits, and then you targeted this clone of Kraken of the Straits with Prothos's ability. Would it be 2 clone tokens coming out, or 2 more Kraken of the Strait tokens coming out? Now, I believe how it works is 2 clone tokens come out because it copies the creature. And I'm pretty sure it does, which means you can have this enter in as copies of other creatures. So other Leviathans, so you don't have to do just Kraken of the Straits. Other Impersonator is where it gets real tricky, because it for 2 generic and double blue is a shapeshifter 0/0 that can enter the battlefield. You may have it enter the battlefield, as a copy of any non-land permanent on the battlefield. Meaning that if you create tokens that are copies of this, I believe those things can be like anything that isn't a land on the battlefield. And legendary, of course, I believe. Well, you can do legendary stuff, it's just as long as you don't have like two of the same thing. Still though, this is broken because like copies entering in as you can get like 2 copies of something like this, and then choose like anything on the battlefield for one of them and like another thing, and have them enter in as copies. Like this is where it begins to get broken. Spark doubles, same thing, except it can enter in as a copy of a planeswalker with an additional loyalty counter, or if it's a creature, then it comes in with an additional +1/+1 counter. And this is for 3 generic and a blue. Sakashima of 1,000 Faces is where just everything absolutely breaks, because for 3 generic and a blue is a 3/1 human. He is a 3/1 human rogue. He has no identity. You may have Sakashima of 1,000 Faces on a battlefield as a copy of another creature you control, except it has Sakashima of 1,000 Faces other abilities. The legend rule doesn't apply to permanents you control. This is broken because you can have this come in as a copy of your commander, and then you have 2 triggers, right? So then you have Krothos, the original copy, Sakashima of 1,000 Faces, and then you can have those 2 Sakashimas become more Krothoses or other creatures. And then, well, you know how it goes. And in fact, now you can create copies that are tokens of Krothos thanks to this. So Sakashima, definitely run him, like he is broken. Mirage Mirror is very interesting because for 3 generic, it's an artifact that for 2, it can become a copy of target artifact, creature, enchantment, or land until in turn. So what you can do here is you can make it a copy of the Kraken, attack with Krothos, and Mirage Mirror, that is a copy of a Kraken, Leviathan, Octopus, or Serpent. Target Mirage Mirror, that is disguised as one of those creatures with Krothos, Lord of the Deep's ability. Make 2 tokens of it, and then when it goes to the end of the turn, those 2 tokens and the original Mirage Mirror go back to being Mirage Mirror. So then those other 2 tokens can become copies of other artifacts, creatures, gems, or lands actually until the turn. So this means if you're running like Cabal coffers, you can get like a bunch of Cabal coffers and just generate endless mana, like unknown amounts. Phyrexian Metamorph, 3 generic and Phyrexian blue mana for a 0/0 artifact creature shapeshifter. Phyrexian blue mana can be paid with either 1 blue mana or 2 life. And you may have Phyrexian Metamorph enter the battlefield as a copy of any artifact or creature on the battlefield, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. So same thing, full copy. Minion Reflector, 5 generic for an artifact that says whenever a non-token creature comes into play under your control, you may pay 2 generic. If you do, put a token that's a copy. Put a token into play that's a copy of that creature. That token has haste, and at end of turn, sacrifice this permanent. So what ends up happening here is that we create more and more tokens, and then those tokens, so like say we play a Kraken, right? And then we pay the 2 for Minion Reflector. We have a Kraken, we have 2 Krakens. One that is original and the other that is a token with haste, which is very important because in order for Krothos, Lord of the Deep's ability to target a creature, that creature has to be attacking. And haste is key to that. So this is pretty nice. Miracle Pretender for 4 generic and blue is a 0/0 shapeshifter and you may have it and the battlefield as a copy of any creature you control, except it gains 2 generic double blue. Return this creature to its owner's hand. So then this can go back into your hand, and then the non-token version can go back in your hand, be played, and become something else entirely. And then you can create a token, return this to your hand, and so on. It's you get it. Mirror image, same thing. As battlefield, you may have it as battlefield. It's a copy of any creature you control. Is a 0/0 shapeshifter for 2 generic and a blue. Vesuvian shapeshifter. This is interesting because for 3 generic and double blue is a shapeshifter 0/0 with morph for 1 generic and a blue. And when it comes into as Vesuvian shapeshifter comes into play or is turned face up, you may choose another creature in play. If you do, until Vesuvian shapeshifter is turned face down, it becomes a copy of that creature card and gained at the beginning of your upkeep. You may turn this creature face down. And Morpheus, you play this card for 3 generic, as a face down 2/2 creature, and they may turn it up at any time for its morph cost. So what ends up happening here is that, so this is turned face up, right? Then that becomes a copy of like any creature you control. So you have, so say a Kraken, for instance. Then you create 2 tokens that are copies of this Vesuvian shapeshifter, thanks to Krothos' ability, right? And you have them as copies. So then, at the beginning of your upkeep, you may have all 3 of these Vesuvian shapeshifters be turned face down. But because what really happens here is like, because as they are in the battlefield or turn face up, they become copies of the creatures. So these are actually face down. So when you turn them face up, it is 3 Vesuvian shapeshifters waiting for you, if that makes sense. So then you can copy again. And it's complicated, but hopefully you understand. Sakashima student, moving on. For 2 generic and double blue is a 0/0 human ninja with ninjutsu. 1 generic and a blue. So for 1 generic and a blue, you can return an unblocked attacker you control to your hand and put this card on the battlefield from your hand, tapped and attacking. And you may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield. Any. Except it's still a ninja in addition to the types. So again, we'll copy thing. Vizier of many faces for 2 generic and double blue is a shapeshifter 0/0 courage. You may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except if Vizier of many faces was embalmed. The token has no mana cost. It's white, and it's a zombie in addition to its other types. And embalm cost of 3 generic and a blue, and double blue, sorry. Meaning that you can exile this from your graveyard and create a token that's a copy of it. Stomp double, 3 generic and a blue for a 0/0 shapeshifter with flash, and you may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield. It's the same thing. Mirror of the Forebears, 2 generic for an artifact that as it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type, and then for 1 until end of turn, Mirror of the Forebears becomes a copy of target creature control of the chosen type, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. So serpents, shapeshifters, probably, maybe. Well, no, because they lose that type. But anyways, so krakens, leviathans, octopi, or octopus creatures, or serpents. Quicksilver, gargantuan, for 5 generic and double blue is a 7/7 shapeshifter that you may have enter in as a copy And the battlefield has a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it's still a 7/7. So pretty nice. Now we get into more of value. So like creatures that we can copy for value, and like value based off like what we're doing. So starting with Palincron for 5 generic and double blue is a illusion for 5 flying that says whenever it enters the battlefield, untap up to 7 lands, and then for 2 generic and double blue, you may return it to its owner's hand. You can. So what ends up happening here is you can start creating tokens that are copies of Palincron, and then you untap 7 lands each time you do it. So you create a token that's a copy of Palincron. That's 7 untapped lands. That's 7 more mana you have available to you during your post-combat main phase. So pretty nice. And then if you activate the activated ability of the non-token variant of Palincron, then you can return it to its owner's hand if need be. Next, we have Things of the Second Sun, which is very, very interesting to say the least. Because for 6 generic and double blue is a 6/6 Sphinx with flying, and it says at the beginning of your post-combat main phase, you get an additional beginning phase after this phase, meaning that you get everything the beginning phase includes, including the untap, the upkeep, and draw steps. So what ends up happening here is if you create a token that's a copy of Sphinx of the Second Sun with Krothos, instead of just getting 1 additional beginning phase after your post-combat main phase, you get 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then it just gets out of hand. It's essentially a sort of feast and famine, except with untap, upkeep, and draw. So you can untap your lands, and then you're just for 1 trigger. So for the first trigger, you untap all your lands, then tap them before the second trigger, and then the second trigger comes around, and then you've got mana to spend. Hopefully before it phases away. Master of Waves for 3 generic and a blue is a 2/1 Merfolk Wizard with protection from red, meaning that red cannot touch it or do anything to it or block it or target it with any abilities. And elemental creatures you control get +1/+1, and when Master of Waves enters the battlefield, put a number of 10 blue elemental creature tokens onto the battlefield equal to your devotion blue, and your devotion blue is each blue mana in mana cost of turns you control counts towards your devotion blue. So since we're creating so many tokens that are copies of like creatures with double blue in them, Master of Waves most likely when we copy it will give us a lot of elemental creatures. So that'll be nice. And then for each one we copied, that is another Lord effect of +1/+1 that is being given to elemental creatures we control. So first +1/+1, then it's +2/+2, and then before you know it, you got like +5/+5, and it's just insane. Blightsteel Colossus. At this point, this is ending the game probably. Because for 12 generic is a 11/11 golem with trample, infect, indestructible, and if they would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, you can reveal Blightsteel Colossus and shuffle it into its owner's library, meaning eventually it could come back to you. The trample is very important. This means this 11/11 can get through for some damage. Indestructible, meaning your opponent has to use exile or -X sort of effects on this to kill it or return it to your hand. And infect means that if a player would have 10 or more poison counters on them, they lose the game. And infect gives you poison counters. Your opponent's really, in this case. And also creatures with infect deal damage to other creatures in the form of -1/-1 counters, and to players, by the way, in the form of poison counters. Meaning that copying this could just outright end the game. And if you have some sort of mask wood or like arcane adaptation, then you're creating 2 of these each time you target with Grotho's ability, due to it being a Kraken most likely, or a Leviathan, Octopus, or Serpent. And then it's even worse for your opponent to block. Allendra Liege, for 1 generic and triple hybrid blue-black. It is a 2/3 Fahrenheit, flying with giving other blue creatures you control +1/+1, and other black creatures you control +1/+1. So first time you copy this, the 2 Allendra Lieges are getting +1/+1, so there are 3 4s. Other blue creatures you control are now getting +2/+2 in that case, except for the Allendra Lieges, keep that in mind. And other black creatures you control other than the Allendra Lieges are getting +2/+2, then +3/+3, and so on and so forth. It gets stupid. Dire Undercurrents, for 3 generic and double hybrid blue-black, is an enchantment that says whenever a blue creature comes into play under your control, you may have target player draw a card, and whenever a black creature comes into play under your control, you may have target player discard a card, so control hand size. Sage's Row Denizen, for 2 generic and blue, is a 2/3 Vidalcan Wizard that says whenever another blue creature enters the battlefield under your control, target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. Great Merchant of Asphodel, or Gary as I like to call him, as everyone likes to call him, is a 2/4 zombie for 3 generic and double black that when it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses X life. Where X is your devotion black, you gain life equal to the life lost this way. So each black in this case, in the mana cost of permanent control, counts towards your devotion black. So first time you just play Great Merchant of Asphodel and you just have Great Merchant of Asphodel out, that's 2 devotion. Say you have like 2 Allendra Lieges out, and then you play Great Merchant of Asphodel, right? So 6. That's 8 devotion, and then you start creating copies of this thing, and it gets insane. Not to mention you staying in the game for a good long time. Airborne Overlord, for 5 generic and double black, is a 6/6 demon with flying that when it enters the battlefield, you put a number of 1/1 black harpy creature tokens with flying onto the battlefield equal to your devotion black at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice creature. So then you start creating tokens that are copies of this thing, and suddenly you have an army of flyers, man. Like your opponent, they're done. Mogus's Marauder, for 2 generic and a black, is a human berserker 2/2, and when it enters the battlefield, up to X target creatures each gain 2 important keyword abilities: Intimidate and Haste until the turn where your devotion to black. Haste allows to attack, and Intimidate says the creature cannot be blocked except by a creature that shares a color with that creature, or artifact creatures, or artifact creatures. So this makes their stuff harder to block and hasty, meaning they can attack and be copied. Meaning that also Mogus's Marauder can be attacking right away, be very hard to block, and can be copied by your commander to give everything else that doesn't already have Intimidate and Haste. Well, although you're already attacking, but still make everything harder to block, and before you know it, opponent's dead. Shadow Alley Denizen, black, it's just 1 black for a vampire rogue 1/1, and whenever another black creature enters the battlefield under your control, target creature gains Intimidate until in turn. So same thing, except black creatures in the battlefield cause it to happen. Bolas's Citadel, very good, because for 3 generic and triple black, it is a legendary artifact that says you may look at the top card of your library at any time, or anytime, as it really says, but still, you get the idea. And you may play the top card of your library. If you cast a spell this way, pay life equal to its converted mana cost rather than pay its mana cost. So this can help you cast Krakens, Leviathans, Octopi, or octopus creatures, or Leviathans for nothing essentially, except for just life. And you can tap Bolas's Citadel and sacrifice 10 mana permanents. Each opponent loses 10 life. So the reason I have this in here is because also for that ability, due to the fact you're creating a lot of tokens, and those tokens for some reason just are not doing you any good, you can start sacrificing like 10 of them to Bolas's Citadel, tap it, and then each opponent suddenly has lost 10 life. So pretty good, nonetheless. Lithoform Engine, however, is even greater because for 4 generic, it is a legendary artifact that for 2 generic, you can tap it and copy target activated or triggered ability you control. You may choose new target for the copy. So activated abilities are like abilities that cost like mana or like have a cost of some type. So like Bolas's Citadel would be considered one of them. So you could copy its life loss ability, or like just tapping in general. So that means you'd like sacrifice 20 permanents and then each one would have lost 20 life. If you did Lithoform's copy target activated ability, if that makes sense, or triggered ability, meaning triggered abilities are abilities that start with when, whenever, or at. And our commander just so happens to use Krothos, Lord of the Deep, just so happens to use whenever. So that means we can double up his triggers and double up the amount of tokens we get. How cool is that? And for 3 generic, we can also tap Lithoform Engine and copy target instant sorcerer spell you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. Not really much of our interest, but for 4 generic, you can tap it and copy target permanent spell you control. That could also be very interesting. The copy becomes a token. It's pretty nice. Altar of Dementia, however, is pretty good as well, because for 2 generic, it's an artifact that you can sacrifice a creature, and then target player puts a number of cards equal to sacrifice creature's power from the top of their library to the graveyard, so otherwise known as mill. This has been seen a lot. And since we are running, Krakens, Leviathans, octopus creatures sometimes, and serpents for the most part have a good amount of power, like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 sometimes, even 11. Like, you're gonna mill your opponent out quick. Alexa, stop. Underworld Hermit for 4 generic and double black is a 3/3 human peasant. And when it is the battlefield, create a number.
Start a 30-minute timer.
30 minutes, starting now.
Yeah, that's fine. Where was I? Oh yes. When Underworld Hermit enters the battlefield, create a number of 1/1 green scroll creature tokens equal to your devotion black. We already went over that, so that could create an army. Nyx Lotus for 4 generic is a legendary artifact that enters the battlefield tap. However, you can tap it and choose the color and add an amount of mana of that color equal to your devotion to that color. So that can add a lot of mana due to the fact that we're creating tokens that are copies of creatures and copying their mana cost along with that. So creating us more devotion. Phenax, God of Deception for 3 generic and a blue and a black. It is a legendary creature, God, indestructible for 7. And as long as your devotion to blue and black is less than 7, he isn't a creature. And creatures you control have tap. Target player puts the top X cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. X is that creature's toughness. Like I said, high toughness, high power. is what most of these sea creatures, these iconic sea creatures, are known for. So revealing our opponent for a lot will not be a problem. And finally, for our 50th card, our last non-land card, we have Shrouded Resonator once again appearing. For 2 generic, it's an artifact that for 2 generic, you can tap it and copy target triggered ability you control, and you may choose new targets to copy. And a triggered ability uses the words when, whenever, or at, I said. And then now we go into non-basic lands. Now, here's where things get interesting. And now some of you may have discovered this, but we'll get into the interesting thing in a minute. But for now, we have Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx, which is still pretty interesting because it's a legendary land, first of all. And you can never go wrong with those unless you are like something from Kamigawa. Like there was some bad stuff. But besides that, Nykthos can tap to add colors, or for 2 generic, you can tap and choose a color. You choose the color. And add to your mana pool an amount of mana of that color equal to your devotion to that color. So like I said, now here's where things get interesting, is creature lands. So creature lands are obviously, if you didn't know, lands that can end up turning into creatures. So our commander can create tokens that are copies of creatures. So what happens here is that is with Westvale Abbey. Now I did kind of forget something. Well, it's still fine. Is a land that can tap to add a color to your mana pool, or for 5 generic, you can pay 1 life and play 1/1 white and black human clear creature token onto the battlefield. And for 5 generic, you can also tap to sacrifice 5 creatures and transform it, then untap it. So this can become what you see on the right, but still pretty good because like we have like tokens that we're creating, so utilize those tokens. And on this side, we have Ormondal. Profane Prince is a legendary creature demon, 9/7 with flying, lifelink, indestructible, and haste. And if you got Sucker Seaman out and you start copying this, oh, your opponents are in some trouble. Now, right, to the very interesting thing, the thing I meant to get to, creature lands, like for real this time, is so Ingmar Nexus here, for example, is a land that can tap for a colorless mana, or for 1 generic, it can become a 1/1 Blink Moth artifact creature with flying, and infect until its turn, it's still a land. And we already went over infect. But if you copy this with Prothos, then suddenly you're copying lands that can become creatures, get copied again, or be used for mana, which suddenly has opened up a lot of possibilities. Again, Mobilized District is also one of those possibilities because it can tap for a colorless, or for generic, it can become a 3/3 citizen creature with vigilance until a turn. It's still land, and this ability costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature and planeswalker you control. So pretty nice, because this can end up being like free, and then you just pay nothing, and boom, you have this become like a 3/3 with vigilance. You attack, create a token that's a copy of, thanks to Grothos's attack trigger. Then suddenly you've got more lands. Mutavault, same thing. This is even scarier because it is a land that can tap, or it is a land that can become a 2/2 creature with all creature types, including Kraken, Leviathan, Octopus, or Serpent. And Serpent. And it's still until a turn, and it's still land. Meaning that if you target this with Prothos's ability, there'll be 2 more of these at the end of your turn. So when you untap, you'll have 3 Mutavaults if you start out with 1, and then so on and so forth. And it just keeps getting scarier and scarier. Mishra's factory. It can tap to add a colorless, is a land, of course. For 1 generic, it can become a 2/2 assembly worker artifact creature until end of turn. It's still land, and then it can tap to give target assembly worker creature +1/+1 until end of turn. Hall of Storm Giants. If you control 2 or more other lands, areas will have to tap, and then it can add a blue 2 mana pool, or for 5 generic and a blue, until a turn, it becomes a 7/7 blue giant creature with ward 3. It's still a lane whenever it becomes the target of a spell, ward ability, and opponent controls, unless that player pays 3 generic. So this can start ending up being scary for your opponents, because if you have a lot of mana lying around, suddenly you can have a bunch of lands become 7/7s out of nowhere. Like that, it's scary. And with ward 3, meaning that if your opponent wants to target those 7/7s, Hall Storm Giants with anything, they have to pay an additional 3, or else that thing is countered like an ability or spell. Creeping Tar Pit is like even scarier at this point. Probably just as scary as Mutable, because it's about to tap. Well, that's not very scary, but it can tap to add a blue or a black. But more importantly, for 1 generic, a blue and a black, it can become a 3/2 blue and black elemental creature token until end turn, and can be blocked this turn. It's still a land, an unblockable land that can start being copied. Hello? This is scary. Faceless Haven. For it's a snow land that can tap for a colorless, or for triple snow. It becomes a 4/3 creature with vigilance, and all creature types until end turn, it's still land. Snow can be paid with 1 mana from a snow source. So now you start creating token star copies of this. Blink Moth Nexus. Ink Moth and Blink Moth. Yes, we have both of them. It can tap to a colorless, or for 1 generic, it can become a 1/1 Blink Moth artifact creature with flying until end of turn. It's still a land, and then for 1 generic, it can tap and target Blink Moth creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So really nice. Crawling Barrens is a land that can tap for colorless, or for 4 generic, it can put 2 +1/+1 cards on itself, and then you may have it become a 0/0 creature with nothing but being a land. I don't know where I was going. I was gonna give it haste, but no, it doesn't have haste. But still, this can be pretty scary. Like I said, creating tokens that are copies of your land. Zodiac Cavern is a land that can tap for a colors, and also for morph. So you can cast it face down as a 2/2 creature, turn it face up anytime for its morph cost of 2 generic. So this is actually still very scary, because then you can cast this face down, start making the face down copies, or are they face up? That's a question I kind of have. Next is Frostwalk Bastion, which is also a snow land that can tap for a colors, or for 1 generic and a snow mana. Until in turn, it becomes a 2/3 construct artifact creature. It's still a land, and whenever it deals combat damage to a creature, tap that creature, and it doesn't untap during its control's next untap set, so you can start leaving your opponent very vulnerable. Mirror in the Morning Well is a legendary land that can tap for colors, and then for 3 generic, you can tap and sacrifice, and you can sacrifice a creature of your choice, and you gain life equal to the sacrifice creature's toughness. And then finally, we have our non-basic lands. We have 18 snow-covered islands and 18 snow-covered swamps. And in addition to all that, we have the end of this EDH guide. The end of Runo, Stormkirk, and Prothus, Lord of the Deep. I hope you enjoyed this EDH guide tonight. please like and subscribe. We're at 8 subscribers, which I also forgot. Thank you to whoever subscribed for giving me 8 subscribers. We're only 2 away now from 10. Love you all who are now currently subscribed to me. It shows that you care. So like I said, please like and subscribe. If we could get a subscriber a day, I'd be happier than I could ever be, probably. I'd be very satisfied. Oh, don't forget to hit the notification bell. That way you don't miss more of this content. And share this video along with others that you may have seen on this channel with friends and family. And if you haven't already, go watch some of my other videos. Goodbye.